Hello, welcome to yet another video looking at the latest release announcements. There are releases coming out almost every day at the moment. In fact, it's a little bit annoying that they're all bunched together because it makes doing these videos a bit of a pain. But the latest, well, actually not the latest, but the latest that I'm recording anyway, is the jcwings late November announcements for models which may or may not arrive by Christmas. I know the Phoenix releases for December have literally just been announced and they'll be in an upcoming video, but in this video we're going to be focusing on the recent jcwings 400 scale announcements, which are an interesting bunch. And there are 13 models announced this month if you don't take into account the flaps up and flaps down versions of them. As per usual with JC, some of them are going to be available quite soon, and some of them haven't even started production yet. And so those ones that haven't, you've only got a picture of the actual aircraft, and the ones that should be here quite soon, you've got pictures of the actual finished models. They're out of the old JC warehouse and probably been sitting there for some time. So look, as always, let's look at rating these and see whether I think they're going to be good or mediocre models. As always, I do this based on, hey, what's been made before, but also looking at the molds that have been done and a bit of understanding about the brand themselves. So we'll get into that in a second, but as always, please subscribe to the channel if you enjoy the videos. Like this video, why not? And check me out at Yes to Airlines on Instagram and Facebook, because I post a lot on those mediums too. And a lot of the material that I push out to those comes directly from the website yesterdaysairlines.com. So as always, check that out. Lastly, 400 Scale in Detail, a great Facebook group to have a closer look and discussion about the scale. So check that out as well. Okay, but now let's get over and look at this set of releases. So what I'm going to do this month is I'm going to split the releases in two chunks. First off, we're going to look at the ones which will be out soon and we can see pictures of the actual finished models. And secondly, we'll look at the ones which have been announced, but as far as I'm aware, have not entered production yet, and therefore there aren't any pictures of the actual models. So we'll start out with an Arkia A321 Neo. This is one of at least 3 Arkia A321 Neos that jcwings are going to be producing. They've already released one model earlier in the year. This one is the second. Each one wears a different color variant of the Arkia scheme. The first one, I think, had the pink base color. This one's got a kind of reddy orangey base color, and the third one looks like it will have a kind of purpley base color. It's actually a really nice livery from Arkia, actually really bright, really exciting, and it's always cool to have different versions of the same scheme, so no problems with the livery. And when I look at how jcwings went about their previous version of this earlier in the year, it actually turned out from a livery perspective really nicely. Unfortunately, as I've talked about beforehand, the JC A321 Neo mold is not the best, mainly because, as with all their Neos, the engines are huge and they hang a little low and they're kind of scraping along the ground. But overall, I'm not completely sold, I have to say, on the JC A321 at the nose either. Somehow it looks worse often than the A320. I don't know why that is. But otherwise, at least it does have the correct wing on it, so it's better than the Phoenixmodels Classics A321 Neos in that regard. But for me, yeah, I don't love the mold, even though this looks like it will be a nice colourful scheme like the previous version. And for that reason, I'm not going to give it a great score. I'm going to put this one up in the gas guzzler. Next up is a Dragonair 747-200 freighter, registered BKAD, and I was surprised when I looked around what had been made previously in this space that it hasn't been a lot or barely any. In fact, there's only been one release of a Dragonair 747-200 freighter, and that was made by Magic Models, who you've probably never even heard of, back in 2007, and I imagine most of those have probably turned to dust, and there were probably only a few hundred made anyway at the time, if even that. So I'm surprised there hasn't been another one since then. There have been a selection of other Dragonair 747 freighters, but those have been either 300s or 400s. And most recently, jcwings did make a 400 freighter on a BCF on their excellent new mould. This one, being the 200 freighter, is appearing on the old Gemini 747 mould, which has got a seam, has got the slightly clunky traditional wing to engine pylon join, which doesn't look great. But overall, it's a solid, old, reliable mould. And I think this will be quite nice. The Dragonair Cargo scheme obviously is largely white, but it's not an unpleasant livery, and it's got the cool Dragonair logo. My only reluctance about it is that I don't really have anywhere else to put any more Dragonair Cargo 747s. I've already got a 300 and a 400. I'm not sure I really need this 200, especially on the slightly older mould. But nonetheless, I still think it's a nice model, and it certainly is a model that hasn't been made by anyone of any worth. Don't really include Magic models as being particularly valuable or worthwhile, and it's incredibly old anyway, and outside the mainstream of collecting. So I actually think this one's going to be a nice model, and it's a worthwhile subject matter, and I'm going to put this one up into high fly, even though the mould itself is a little bit old and out of date. Moving on, and we've got our first flaps up and flaps down version model, and this one is in the colours of the Global Supertanker Services. It's a 747 BCF, registered N744ST, and this aircraft was interestingly converted to a tanker in September 2016, but only lasted in service as a tanker until November 2020, and since then it's actually moved on to National Airlines and been restored back to being a freighter, which is a little disappointing. It made a super awesome tanker for firefighting, certainly. And the livery's really nice. It's got this really cool wavy Boeing house colours-esque scheme with the big 944 tanker reg on the tail. It looks really, really good. And what is nice is, of course, this is on the new and improved and spectacularly good jcwings 747-400 mod, so it's going to be really, really cool. The only people who've made this model previously are Phoenix. You surely know what I think of their 747-400 mold. They made this in 2019, and the model looks appalling. Obviously, there are many aspects wrong with it, but the most obvious from the pictures that I see is that the inboard engines literally are dragging along the ground. Disastrous. But this one, this new jcwings version, I can already see this looks really good. And it's a really cool livery, and it's a really interesting kind of side aircraft to create. So top marks to them. This one's going straight up into supersonic. This is going to be a really cool, excellent release. Well done, JC, for that one. Next up, we move back to airlines, and we've got a Turkish 787-9. This again is a flaps up and a flaps down model. The registration is TC Lima Lima Foxtrot. Turkish Airlines has got this really cool scheme with the big tulip on the back. Is it a tulip or a crocus? I can't remember. It's got a big flower on the back regardless, and it looks really nice. Really sets off what would otherwise be quite a bland scheme. But the things that are perhaps going against this release somewhat is that it has been made before. There have already been 6 other Turkish 787s. One was made by Gemini only last year using exactly the same mould. That was registered Lima Lima Oscar. So I was a little surprised that this model exists, especially also because JC themselves made it in both flaps up and flaps down versions back in 2019 themselves. So this is actually going to be third distinct version using this mould, which is kind of pointless. I get the feeling this is probably sitting in the factory for a while, the way that things do sometimes with JC. In fact, it's probably been there ever since they made that first version in 2019. Either way, it means I can't, even though the mould's great, I can't give this anything more than workhorse. It's a repeat, and it's been done, you know, even by Gemini on the same mould. So no, definitely a workhorse for this 787. Now, however, something which is a lot more exciting and probably the model of the month, at least from my perspective, is this Aeroflot Il86, which has just been announced. Now, I've been talking a lot on my channels in Yesterday's Airlines about the Il86 recently, partly because YU model has had a China Xinjiang version made for them by JC, and that's on its way to me actually from China, hopefully, if via Taobao. But this new JC release is in the colours of Aeroflot. It is exactly the same actually as one they'd made previously quite a long time ago, back in 2009, with the Russian flag colours on the tail. But I'm not letting that put me off, partly because it's amazing to see the Il86 back again, and I know there are going to be some more coming from jcwings, so I'm really looking forward to seeing those. But also because this possibly opens up some really cool customization opportunities for airlines that have the Aeroflot cheat line. So I've got one of my friends who's looking into maybe doing some customized versions of this into other airlines, and that's super exciting. So I'm really pleased to see this Il86 mold back. For anyone who doesn't have an Il86 already, I can highly recommend getting them. It's an excellent mold. It's a really cool aeroplane, and this model looks excellent. So this one's going straight up into supersonic because it ticks all the boxes for me. So that's all of the models which are going to be out soon for this month, but that still leaves us with 8 other models to discuss, which will be out, who knows when, at some point next year maybe, if you're lucky. And there's some interest to be had in these, because JC is at least picking some subjects that no one else has made, at least not yet. By the time they get released, they could have all been made by somebody else, but who knows. The first model is another A321neo. This one is in the colours of Korean Air. It's registered Hotel Lima 8505. It's got all the same issues mold-wise as the Archie and Neo, so there's not a lot for me to say about it. I'm sure somebody else will make a Korean Air A321neo before this model gets released by jcwings, and that again makes it less exciting. So this one really, there's not much for me to say. It's a weak mold. It's not going to be released anytime soon. Someone else is bound to do it on a better mold before then. So this one's going in the gas guzzler. Not a lot to say there. The next model, however, is unique in 400 scale and probably will be for a while unless Phoenix decide to make it. And that is for an airline from Korea also, but one that's called Fly Gangwon. And to be honest, I didn't know this airline existed until I saw this model, and I've looked it up, and I can see that they are a South Korean low-cost carrier that flies 737-800s at the moment, and they've got some A330s coming into the fleet. This one is registered HL8512. The livery is actually not bad. It's not an awful livery, but it is that kind of classic Euro white. It doesn't really look that low cost, which is interesting, especially on an A330. The JC A330 mold, it's okay. It's not spectacular. It's not disastrous. It's just kind of okay. If Phoenix make this, then I prefer to get the Phoenix version of it. I think they may well do. Hard to say. But this one will probably be okay. But it does make it quite difficult to give a ranking to. I want to give it points for being unique, but the mold isn't great. It's not going to be out anytime soon. So I'm going to put this one into workhorse. It's also not an airline that I'm likely to be interested in collecting, but nonetheless, I'll move this Fly Gangwon A330 into the workhorse club. Next up is a South American A350 in the colours of Azul, registered Papa Romeo Alpha Oscar Yankee. This again will be available in flaps up and flaps down when it gets out, and who knows when that will be. There has actually been an Azul A350 made before, and even using the jcwings mold. It was made bizarrely by Aero Classics years ago, but I don't think Azul ever took delivery of those A350s at that point in time, so it's effectively a fantasy model. So this is the first release of an actual Azul A350, but it's surely not going to be the last. In fact, I'm pretty sure I just saw that Phoenix are releasing this model too, and it wouldn't surprise me if NG2 as well. So there's going to be some serious competition here. Having said that, the Azul scheme is really attractive. It's got that kind of Delta vibe with the belly, and it looks like an attractive, cool scheme, and it fits the A350 really nicely. So this should be a good model. Again, it kind of picks up some minus points because who knows when it's going to get released. The JC A350 is quite nice, but it's not as nice as the AV400 or the NG models, and that stops me from putting it up there into supersonic. So I'm going to put this one into the high flyer territory. It's going to be a good model, just not sure when it's going to come out, so hopefully not too long. Moving on, and we've got a couple of 737s up next, and the first one is a military 737, i.e. a C-40A, in the colours of the United States Navy, white top. It's kind of half a scheme. There's not really much of a livery on this, really, as is often the case, I guess, with military aircraft. It's not particularly exciting in terms of its look and feel, but if you collect military aircraft, then I guess that is probably something you have to live with. I would say that I'm not a fan of the mould. JC haven't used the 737-700 mould much. I think Gemini have used it more often, but I've got an example. I've got a Cunning Airlines version. It's kind of stubby and chunky. The undercarriage is big. It basically accentuates some of the worst features of the 800 mould, which it's based off of, and I really am not a big fan of their 700. So yeah, I don't like livery. I don't really collect military aircraft, and at the same time the mould's not particularly good here. I'm going to put this one down in the gas guzzler with the A321 Neos. It's just a mould I would like them to replace, to be honest. And the same goes for the 800 too, which the next model is, but it doesn't look quite as bad. I've already talked about this just on the recent Gemini video, the mould, because it's shared. It really doesn't impress me much. Especially when there's such good competing 737-800s out there nowadays. Having said that, this livery, a Gol 800 PR GXB in this Goldo Brazil World Cup colours, looks really nice. So you can't fault the scheme. Gol have done a really good job here, and it looks pretty cool. And if you're interested in World Cup schemes, then this one will be nice. But World Cup will be long over by the time it comes out, and it's on that mediocre mould, so I'm going to put this one, it's not as bad as the 700, I'm going to put this one in the workhorse. I hope, and I would expect, to be honest, that somebody else will make this NG probably well before this JC release gets out. Okay, so that leaves us with 3 more models to discuss. The next one is quite an interesting choice. It is in the colours of Northern Pacific Airways. Northern Pacific is this, I think, Alaskan-based carrier, which may or may not ever actually get to fly. I think their idea is to be kind of like the Icelandair of Alaska, where they can use their geographical position to as a transit hub. And they've got the 757s. I'm just not sure they're actually flying yet, to be honest. Yeah, well, regardless of whether it flies, it's still quite an interesting idea for a release. I'm surprised no one else has done it yet, and the paint scheme on these Northern Pacific 757s is pretty cool. And it includes a bandit mask as well, which, to be honest, the 757 doesn't need, because it already looks like an awesome aircraft without it. But it's a nice scheme, and this will be a good model. Even though the JC 757 mould is weaker than the NG mould, still I think they'll do a decent job here. And I'm tempted to put this one up into high flyer, to be honest, because of its uniqueness. That's perhaps a little generous, but I'm going to do it anyway. This one's going to go in high flyer. I think this will be a nice model. I just hope they get these things out in a sensible timescale, and of course you never know that they will with JC, which is a problem. The next release is another flaps up, flaps down version. This one is Lufthansa Cargo. It's a 777 freighter. The aircraft is another one of these Lufthansa aircraft that doesn't have a scheme. So I'm a natural beauty, the aircraft says on the side of it, waiting for my Lufthansa Cargo makeover or something like that. It's just a blank aeroplane. Great mould, rubbish fake scheme, which obviously will get repainted anyway into a pretty boring Lufthansa Cargo scheme anyway. Yeah, it's just got workhorse written all over it. Nothing exciting. I'm remotely interested in this workhorse. And speaking of white aeroplanes, the last model is actually another white aeroplane, and this one is a Comac C919, and the airline colours this is in is it's in the colours of China Eastern, and that's where the white aeroplane comes in, because obviously China Eastern standard scheme is basically a white aeroplane with the swallow logo on the tail. There have been quite a few Comac 919s, and some of them are in airline colours. However, this one is, to the best of my knowledge, the first actual aircraft painted in an airline colour scheme. It's a shame it's a relatively tedious one. There has been an NG China Eastern 919 made before, but it was in a fake retro territory, not a real aircraft. So I'm not entirely sure whether this aircraft is the first delivery example or not, but regardless, it's in the actual colours of China Eastern. Yeah, I collect a lot of Chinese airlines, so even though this has got a boring livery, I collect a lot of China Eastern, and if it actually gets delivered to them, I'll buy this aeroplane. So I know a lot of people wouldn't, but it's no worse than buying Japan Airlines or Finnair, or even arguably Lufthansa. And I really like the logo on the tail. I'm actually going to put this one on the high flyer, because it is the first time I will have the opportunity to potentially have a C919 in my airline fleet. So for me, that's quite exciting. The aircraft, I know everyone thinks it's just a Chinese rip-off, what's A320, but it isn't. They've obviously put a lot of work into this aeroplane. And yeah, I'm quite looking forward to getting this, assuming that it gets delivered. So I'm going to put this one on the high flyer, benefit the doubt such as it is. There's a good chance that NG might make it beforehand again anyway, so you never know. But I'll put this one up in the high flyer too. Okay. And that's it for this month. I've been trying to get through this video a little quicker than usual, because I do a lot of talking and I've got a lot of these videos to do, and yeah, is this a good month for JC? It's not bad. It's not bad. We've got two supersonics, that lovely tanker 747, and of course the Aeroflot Il86. We've got some decent supporting aircraft like the Dragonair Cargo, and we've got some less exciting stuff like the Turkish 787 and the Ark here, but that's always going to be the nature of the way JC dribble out their releases over the years. In terms of the future stuff, again, a couple of mediocre stuff, choices there, but also some interesting additions, but really hard to say much about them without knowing when they're going to come out and who's going to release competing models. So, part of the course really for jcwings. But that's it for this month for JC. Stay tuned for the Phoenix video, which I should be recording in the next day or so. Thank you very much, guys. Be interested to know what you think of this month's jcwings releases and which models you're excited by. But I'll see you in the next video.